American forces pushing westward across the Pacific. The 14th attacked with every weapon in its arsenal. Despite bad weather, fighters strafed troop columns with rockets, frag bombs, and machine guns. Many cavalry columns spearheading the drive were broken up by strafing and bombing. All this cost American blood, as well as gas, bombs, and sweat. Pilots flew 3 and 4 missions a day for weeks without end. These Jap prisoners taken at Hengyang were thin and half-starved. They said no rice and little ammunition had reached them for weeks because of air attacks. American bombers and transports dropped supplies to the Chinese garrison by parachute. Then the 14th ran out of gas. Some fields had no gas. Some had just enough for one more mission. At others, gas was pumped from bomber tanks to keep the fighters in the air. Before enough gas reached the advanced fields, the Japs had surged over Hengyang, never again to be halted until they had split free China. The great retreat was on. One by one, the airfields the Chinese had clawed out of their precious rice paddies with their hands were mined and made ready for destruction. The 14th fought a desperate delaying action. To the last, American pilots flew 4 and 5 missions a day, living in hostels stocked with gasoline, never knowing when the order to apply the torch would come. Generals Chennault, Stilwell, and Vincent conferred at Guilin, issued orders to blow up the fields. All but a few combat crews were evacuated by air. Attempts were made to salvage all possible equipment and supplies, but much of the precious hump-hauled freight had to be burned to keep it from the Japs. Hostels and warehouses were burned to the ground. That night, the hangars, the barracks, the equipment flown in over the highest mountains in the world burned like a funeral pyre. In the early morning, there was nothing left of a great American air base but scorched earth and the bitter taste of smoke in the air. The Chinese who lived in the city near the river set fire to their own shops and homes. What they could not carry on their backs, they burned. This was what they left to the Japs. Broken walls, streets full of ashes. When the town was completely destroyed, they blew up the bridge behind them. There were many cities like this in China. Some were burned by the Japs, some by the Chinese as they slowly retreated. After 7 years of war, this was the face of China. On the last day, runways were blasted by 500 and 1,000-pound bombs. One by one, the bases were destroyed. Hengyang, Lingling, Guilin, and finally Luzhou. The headquarters safe was removed. And the flag came down at Luzhou on the afternoon of November 7th. Combat crews packed their luggage in B-25 bomb bays. Carrying 10 to 15 men, the Mitchells took off from Luzhou for the last time. A few hours after these pictures were taken, the runways were destroyed. The Japs were only 20 miles away. In the wake of the Jap advance, a tide of homeless Chinese flowed along the long and bitter road to Kunming. Chaos and suffering defied description. When these pictures were taken, 80 trains waited to be routed westward from Luzhou over a single track. 100 waiting to be shipped with thousands of gallons of gasoline salvaged from the abandoned airfields. The few remaining guns of the Chinese army, American ammunition, tools from a machine shop, even railroad ties, all took precedence over the people. A captured Jap Zero was shipped back for intelligence examination. Meanwhile, the refugees clung to hope and waited. Some, considered lucky, fled by trucks, stinking charcoal burners, alcohol burners that had to be warmed and pushed to start. A truck carrying American belly tanks mingled with the mob. The road was lined with broken down trucks. Many were stripped of parts to keep others going. The only way to stop runaway trucks without brakes was to run them off the road, where many of them stayed along with the equipment they carried. Most of the homeless horde inched their way on foot, with all their belongings in the bags dangling from poles. Beaten and weary Chinese soldiers mingled with the civilians, many of them without either rifles or shoes. They carried sick and wounded on bamboo stretchers. Farmers and soldiers combined to carry much of the rice harvest beyond the reach of the enemy. Jap fifth columnists helped spread panic. All over eastern China, these scenes were repeated throughout the blistering summer and wet, muddy fall. Here was a people again uprooted, repeating the scenes of 7 long and horrible years of war. These refugees had long been a favorite target for Japanese pilots. But during this long trek, Jap airmen declined to venture into American-held sky by day. No Chinese were killed by strafing or day bombing. General Chennault ordered special fighter patrols over railroad yards and other congested areas when Jap air attacks seemed imminent. None came. Prices along the road to Kunming, refugees streamed past new airfields that thousands of other Chinese were building to give General Chennault's flyers new springboards for attack. In Burma, crack Chinese divisions were loaded into transports and flown to the crumbling East China front. They had American artillery, bazookas, mortars, machine guns, and plenty of ammunition, and had proved they knew how to use them in driving the Japs out of North Burma. Colonel Luke Williamson's flying coolies rushed other fresh troops from Chongqing to the threatened area. The Japs were within 20 miles of cutting the Burma Road in China and overrunning the new American fields when these veteran Chinese troops, supported by air attack, hurled them back 60 miles off the Kweijo Plateau down into the valleys of East China. The Japs had started out in May to take the Canton-Hankow Railroad, occupy strategic coastal areas, and knock the 14th out of China. When they were checked in January, they had the railroad and the strategic areas, but they had failed to knock the 14th out of China. Even while they were fighting to clear China of the 14th, the Far Eastern Air Force and the Navy bombed the China coast from the Pacific. Their attacks were echoed by bombs from China-based planes hitting the same targets. The Japanese lifeline was caught in a vice of American air power, stretching around the world. More supplies reached the 14th as the first convoys traveled the Lido Road, opening the first land supply route to China in 3 years. From new bases all over China, the Flying Tigers renewed their offensive. And the Japs well knew what the relatively few planes of the 14th on their China flank could do. This is what they have already done. Destroyed 2,000 small supply boats and hundreds of locomotives, trains, vital bridges, supply dumps, and barracks. Destroyed 2,500 Japanese planes. Killed 35,000 Jap troops. Sunk and damaged 1.75 million tons of Jap merchant shipping. That was the work of the Flying